Hey everybody, it's Candy, aka Brown Eyed Girl, and we're back with Chapter 9 of Mr. Wolf and Me. And the title of this chapter is Carnage. By the time we got home from Concord that Saturday night, all the little kids were already off the streets. We saw some bunches of older kids prowling around with big sacks to beg candy from any house stupid enough to have left a lit jack-o'-lantern out front. Seeing them with their ape masks and their hobo outfits reminded me of Matt Turpin and the guys. I wondered passingly what special trick they had thought up that Matt was afraid to tell me over the phone. The dullness in my chest about Mr. Wolf kept me from being interested enough to check it out with anyone. Those guys were probably not even home yet when I went to bed. It was a fight to go to sleep in that room whose silence seemed eerie without Mr. Wolf's steady, even breathing from the dark beside the bed. Mom laid a folded blanket at my feet, saying that I might need it for the coming storm. Actually, I figured she was just trying to tell me she was thinking about me and didn't know any other way short of getting sloppy. But she was right about the storm. I was wakened by that funny tapping from the shutters of their room. When I got up to unfold the blanket, I saw that strange lightness outside was from falling snow. It wasn't the heaviest fall I'd ever saw, but it was definitely snow, piling against the bases of the bushes in the yard and pasting itself against the trunks of the trees. I thought about Mr. Wolf. He was too young to remember another winter, so snow would be something new to him. What if he wasn't even going to be around to snap and jump at snow, like I've seen other puppies do? Just thinking about it made it hard to go back to sleep. And then, before it was even full dawn, I was awakened again by the sound of men's voices. I stiffened to listen, trying to figure out who would be downstairs talking to Dad at the crack of dawn on Sunday morning. I was already out on the floor when Dad opened my door very cautiously. "Sheriff Cravens is here, Miles," he whispered. "He wants us to take a little trip with him." "What for?" I asked. "What's it all about?" "Just dress warmly," he cautioned, still in that very careful voice. "And don't forget boots." From the way he was whispering, I figured that Mom must still be asleep. As I tiptoed past her room, I could see that untidy mop of dark curls on the far pillow, and knew I was right. I hesitated in the hall a minute, hoping she would open her eyes and see me there. That was silly. I tiptoed on downstairs with my boots in my hand. Dad had scribbled something on a half sheet of notebook paper. He was putting it under a magnet on the refrigerator when I came into the kitchen. "In case your mom wakes up before we get back," he explained. His expression was so strange that I read the note while I tied the laces at the tops of my boots. It didn't tell me anything. It only said that he and I were gone and would be back soon. Lots to learn from that, I thought, as I followed Dad out and got into the back of Sheriff Craven's car. Not until we passed the common and started out the road going north did it occur to me that we might be headed for Jordan Niagara's place. But that didn't make it any sense. It would have scared me, except that I could picture Mr. Wolf safe in one of those cages at Doc Fletcher's, pacing back and forth and watching the snow coming down. The men hardly talked at all. "Pretty heavy for a first snow," Dad said. "It'll never stick on," Sheriff Cravens replied. "The ground's still too warm." When they turned off onto the old post road, I was as sure as anything we were headed for Aggers, even if it still didn't make any sense. Because that road isn't as important as it was back in the old days, and they don't keep it up very well. Sheriff Craven slowed down to maneuver the ruts that caught at his wheels. Every once in a while I saw a white circle where snow had completely filled a pothole. We passed the old post inn all boarded up, and I could see the long and short of rabbit tracks crisscrossing the front drive. And then I heard the drumming. For years, my friends and I biked out there and listened by the hour, hoping to hear that ghostly sound. We never heard even the first tap. Yet there, over the sound of the car's motor, I heard the slow cadence begin, then increase speed to a frantic pace, and then stop suddenly, like halfway through a breath, like your own breath does when you are really startled. Superstition, I told myself. The whole ghostly drummer story was trumped up by somebody to scare people. A fellow could probably even figure out what caused that noise if he'd really wanted to look into it. But I wasn't able to think very clearly right then. Being hauled out of bed and taken off into the night was enough to spook me without hearing that strange, steady, rapping muffled by snow. I listened numbly, remembering how people said that to hear the sound of that ghostly drummer was a really bad omen. They said it always meant that something really ugly was going to happen to you, and neither Dad nor Sheriff Craven showed a sign of hearing a thing. I never saw the Aggers farm until we pulled up that rutted lane, but right off it looked the way Jordan Aggers did, mean and poor and hunched in. The house was a tall, thin two-story frame that looked as if it had never seen paint. A cluster of rusty farm machinery huddled out by the barn, and dead vegetation was snagging the snow in rows of what must have been summer garden. One window in the house gleamed light as we pulled into the drive, but Jordan Aggers was out by the fence waiting for us. He must have been standing there just like that for a long time. One side of his clothing had turned white from the blowing snow so that he looked rooted, as if he couldn't have walked away if he wanted to. Nobody said anything. Jordan Aggers didn't even glance at me. Instead, when we came even with the fence, he opened the gate and held it while we walked through. Then he neatly latched it behind us. We passed the barn and a smelly chicken house, where a cock was screaming morning, and some hens were clucking crossly back at him. Then we got to the corner of the next building, and Jordan Aggers stopped. When I am about 100 years old and have been everywhere in the world and have seen everything in the world, I expect maybe I can get that picture out of my mind. Anyway, I hope so. The smell hit first, an oily kind of smell with some sick, sweet odor mixed in. We were facing a big fenced-in area, and the ground everywhere was splashed with scarlet on that snow. It was blood. Blood everywhere. There on the white, like toys that some kid had torn apart and thrown away, were dead lambs. They had been split open and dragged around the yard so that the great streaks of red showed against the white. Their necks were at odd, broken angles, and their eyes stared steadily off at nothing. The only old dead sheep was huge with yellowed curly hair and gray horns, but he was broken and thrown away just like the little ones. The rest of the sheep were clustered against the fence, staring at us with wide, expressionless eyes. My stomach began to grab at itself, kind of like cramps. Then I got hiccoughs. Not ordinary hiccoughs, but deep, quick hiccoughs that brought the food up from my stomach. I stood there vomiting and didn't even know it was coming. Dad must have handed me his handkerchief because later I realized I had it in my hand. Right then, in the middle of my being so sick, one of them female sheep separated herself from the group by the fence and crossed the yard. She walked in small, neat steps like a lady on an urgent social errand. She went straight to one of the dead lambs and sniffed at it. She nudged at it a few times with her nose as if she was trying to make it get up. Then she raised her head to the sky and began to cry. Her tongue looked fat and pink and curled, with the snow landing on it as she mourned in that rough, choppy rhythm of a sheep's cry. Jordan Aggers seemed like some other guy. All the anger and resentment had gone from him, and he seemed old. A tired patience heavied his voice as he spoke. "That enough?" he asked quietly. When my dad nodded, Jordan turned and walked into the shelter that ran alongside the sheep yard. Just inside the shelter, he leaned over and tugged a big green tarp up and threw it off onto the snowy ground. I felt like somebody had hit me in my stomach. My lungs wouldn't work at all. A flood ran out of my eyes and burnt going down my cheek. But I couldn't have said a word if my life depended on it. There, on the floor of that sheep shelter, was his delicate legs crossed at the ankle, the way he always sleeps, lay Mr. Wolf. His head was down on his chest so that the fine black arch of the back of his neck was a graceful curve. There couldn't be any mistake. Every line of silver and tuft of glossy black hair was the same. He looked beautiful and peaceful and absolutely still as his open eyes stared past the gaping bullet hole in the middle of his forehead. I saw Jordan Agger's face begin to rotate slowly as his eyes met mine. Then I saw the ground of the sheep enclosure start to move upward unevenly, bearing the fuzzy images of the dead sheep in the air with it. Something caught hard at my elbow, and I heard Dad's voice say, as if it was from a long way away, "Hang on, Miles, hang on." Then I don't remember anything more about that place. It still makes me feel really silly that I checked out like that. It's embarrassing to realize that those three men had to pick me up like a baby and stow me in the back seat of Sheriff Craven's car. When I started coming to, it was a slow, sickening rhythm in my head that carried their voices. Maybe it was too strong medicine, Sheriff Cravens was saying. But I couldn't argue with Jordan that he needed to see this for himself to believe it. What other way was there to make him understand? None, Dad said quietly. He's not a kid, not at 13. I wouldn't have believed it myself. His voice kind of trailed off. It was Jordan Agger's voice that brought me all the way awake. Like I said, there wasn't any anger left in the man. His voice sounded flat and tired and hurt. You'll have to take my word that I'm sorry, but you know I had no choice. It's easy to get ticked off by a cocky kid like that, and I admit he got to me a couple of times. He sure stuck by that animal the whole way. You have to give him that. I lay perfectly still until I felt the vibration of the engine start and the car bumping along the rough lane that led back down the old post road. Then I heard the rustle as Dad turned from the front seat. "How you doing back there?" he asked softly. "Okay, I guess," I replied. "We had to let you see for yourself," Sheriff Craven said, like an apology. I struggled up into the seat. "But I don't understand," I protested. "How did he ever get out of Doc Fletcher's? I thought he was safe in there." "We all did." Sheriff Craven's voice was rueful. "It was somebody's idea of a Halloween prank. They cut open all the pens over at Fletcher's last night. By the time the tenant heard the noise, there was only one animal left, a toy French poodle standing in his water dish, barking bloody murder."